Okay, guys, we got iterations tonight. What in the heck is iterations? If you look in the online, you'll see that iterative refers to a term that it describes approaches, methods, and processes which involve repeating cycles or iterations, reiterations. Well, well, Leo's come in with an interesting question, but I want to thank everybody first: Ben C, Sonia, Jimmy C, rather, Adam C, Stephen J, and Lynn Jen, for your stalwart recurring contributions to the cause. You guys are the soldiers that make this keep happening. Thank you so much, guys. But this could be long, so I'm going to jump right into it. Although I am supposed to mention that we're trying to have a London workshop, an intensive workshop for 4 straight weeks. And we're talking about middle of May or end of May to the middle of June. And it's for oil painting, and it's a Boston School workshop, really, and oil painting and for pastel. And just needed to mention that so you can get your thinking going on, figuring out how you can do it. If you can, love to see you there. Let's jump into Leo's point. I think I'm going to read through this and talk about some of these points, and then I'm going to walk you through them in a very methodically after that. But I really like, well, first of all, I like your first comment here, Leo H. Maybe this is a dumb question. You know, the crazy thing about it is that if you're missing something, there's no such thing as dumb. I mean, dumb is if you don't figure it out. So it can lead to a very good discussion for everybody, though. So assume that if you're missing on something, that so somebody else is too. And I really liked what you brought up today, this idea that you're talking about iteratively working. It's not a word I use on an everyday basis, but so let's talk. Let's just read you. But in the visual, okay, maybe this is a dumb question, but in the visual draw as you see it approach, and what we usually say is draw with your eyes. Do you still work iteratively? That is to say, are we all over the place again and again and again? That's what it means to be all iteratively. It means you revisit areas again. And of course, that's virtually defines what we do. You know, it's really exactly what we do. Do we still work iteratively? So I'm going to show you all how that works, and aiming at you in particular, Leo H. By that he means once you put down a contour line, can you still go back and correct it without losing the grace of the original line? That's an interesting thing that comes up there. If you're concerned about not drawing a beautiful line because you might have to correct it, you're not a human. You know what I mean? I just sometimes think of sports, and I think that how many guys running up and down the floor are doing it just perfectly. Every once in a while they do, though. But in every iteration of getting that layup, they have a chance to do it more beautifully. I mean, in the course of a night, sometimes you'll see a really good player. You'll see him suddenly hitting shots that he was missing for the first half of the game. And what would that have been except that corrective activity? But still, he's doing the same continuous whatever, the long line thing. But that may not sound like it's fitting yet, but maybe it will by the time we're done. All right. Can you still go back and correct it without losing the grace of the original line? Absolutely. And I'll show you how that works exactly. But the point is that when you go back to correct it, you're not just correcting it, you're building in the new data and improving the line, or you're redrawing with more awareness, and you're going to draw it even better this time. So fearfulness of losing is a very bad mentality. Don't be afraid of losing the grace of the original line. You're going to make it even more impressive. Because by the time we're done with it, you've revisited the same line over and over again with the idea of making it even better each time, seeing it better, grasping it better, observing it better, and then articulating it better. The proponents of the constructive method will often say that it helps to address the large relationships first, and then break those down iteratively into smaller relationships and areas. Now, everybody does that, actually. There's variations on how you think about it. Then one can trust that while working on smaller, more detailed areas, the larger relationship is already correct. That we don't do. The larger relationships are set up. They're essentially in motion. But lots of things are going to come into play that are going to make it even more correct, right? And even more like. Correct is a tough word. How does one avoid and correct one's mistakes when working with the visual approach? And again, drawing with your eyes approach, right? And drawing what you see and not other things that you're like hack marks or whatever. And again, I say that, I don't mean to say that in a rude way, but it does sound bad. If one must address both the large and small relationships simultaneously, how does one avoid and correct one's mistakes? So you don't avoid, they're not so much mistakes, you don't avoid, they're just first tries. And then the correcting of them is what we all do all the time. That's the very nature of our form. And you do it, we just happen to do it with our eyes. So I'll show you how that works. Hopefully this conversation will come across as not being just generic to all painting, which I've done, with discipline in two different directions, the impressionist and the academic. If one must, asking with genuine curiosity and an open mind. Thanks for the video. Hope to hear back from you soon. Again, Leo, thank you for allowing me, for putting this question out here. It's an excellent question. It really opens up a discussion that we've never unpacked deeply. We do talk about it. When I talk about the start, Boston School starts, you've seen me do demonstrations like the one of the drawing. You'll see how this, if you go back and look at these again after you heard this conversation, you're going to see even better how it all works. So let's see if we can, so I'm just going to start you with this. This is a demonstration I did on the left. And I'm going to show you what the all over the place thing looks like in various levels, okay? So the first level would have been, I would have gone around here and made a few lines, literally, because it's white paper and I don't want to have big stains. I don't put down big masses on white paper because if this is in the wrong place by a little bit, all of a sudden I'll have to push back the head and I might not be able to get a quality light effect there. So this is, first of all, you send out fairly light lines. And you're setting up something up here, you're setting up some stuff down here in a linear way, and you're getting around. So you have the top and the bottom, you're checking out that angle, make sure it's good, and you're finding some major subdivisions maybe through here, stuff like that maybe, whatever else, quarters even, things like this, and areas through here. So we are doing that in a linear way just to get some general sense of the gesture and the proportions. These aren't long lines, and they're called floating lines, okay? But we're all over the place, top and bottom and all over the place with lines that might be helpful to us. We're actually making that judgment as we go. We're not following a formula. We're just looking at it, and we are working from the majors to the minors. So we're thinking the grand abstraction, the big gesture of the whole, and we're talking about, when it comes to proportions, the width of the general width to the whole, and we're talking about the what else? I mean, that sort of thing. Or the simple proportions in the linear way, like halves and quarters or whatever. We're talking about majors and then gradually less and less. But we do draw with very specific bumps. We draw the shape we see, even though all we really want is to make that point. We draw the shape we actually see, even though we're just trying to put that in a place where we can easily see that it's in the right place compared to the top and bottom, et cetera. Do you see what I mean? But that's in line, and we move those lines, okay? We adjust them, so you're going over it twice, and you make the adjustment, so you can believe you can see on some adequate level that it looks like that's about the ballpark. I call these scouts, these lines, you send out the scouts. And you can begin to see that is basically looks like it's going to be the gesture and the proportions of the figure. And then you begin a second iteration, and that is you're going to go around again. This time you're going to go around massing up to those lines and establishing the look of nature, as it were, in other words, with the values, and the line gone, massing right up to it flat, right? So now you begin to have things like light, right? Light effects. But you're revisiting the angle between the two, and you're revisiting, improving the shape to whatever extent the shape was there. And so you see that in all these areas, we've masked to a light effect, and we've articulated the shape quite specifically. And I'm thinking probably we came through. This thing seems to have been fairly important. It seems to be, I don't know if that's a part of the body or something behind her, but that's a very interesting mark where there's a lostness, and it creates a very good sort of type of a near halfway place. Gamble, by the way, used to say that halfway isn't that interesting, but everything is, but near halfway is, okay? Thirds, quarters, nothing is, those aren't things we are looking for as much as we're looking for larger proportions of whatever kind. Sometimes where this lands is more like the golden mean, the location of this to the whole is a very interesting spot, right? And that sort of thing is not uncommon in painting. Now, I don't want to get lost in that. I'm going to jump away. I'll probably come back to the right figure later, but this is where I started figuring out how to not make mistakes, which you're going to bring up in a second, which you did bring up. How do you avoid making mistakes? As you actually make your corrections as you go. I may as well say that now since you brought it up. But so what I'm doing is I'm massing this, I'm getting this to this, I am correcting that line angle as I go. If the value contrast between this and this is wrong, I correct that as I go. Do you see what I mean? In other words, I correct it to what information I have. I can't make it perfect. I'm not doing sight size. I'm not matching this to nature. I'm making this right to this. And I do it as I go. So this, by effect, this contrast and that light, this dark and that light, making that with that edge, these things here, I'm doing that and correcting them as I go. I'm getting the angle relationship as I go. I get the proportion to the whole as I go. And as I go and they suggest widths, I make sure I check them out as I go. And I keep watching to see that my gesture is in the ballpark. So it's always watching as you go. We're not applying some formula. First you do this and that, and by the time you get after a while, you're going to have, as I said before, like when I did this one, I found in about an hour I had like 40 errors. Not in this figure, but in a different one, which has caused me to get on the path of sitting down and I had to check my time because I just did this video already and I'm doing it twice now. Oh boy. So what was I saying? Oh, I shouldn't have said that. Oh yeah, but you get to the point where you're laying in a cast drawing, and it's just sitting there. It's firm. I mean, nothing about moving figures or anything, and you find yourself with like an uncontrollable amount of backstragglers. Everything is wrong. Where were you? Where was I? Was my question. Where was I when I was painting? Well, I just slowed the whole process down, put down a top and bottom, and just saw how many things could already be wrong. And that's what brought me into this process, okay? Then at that point, you have to be all over the place at once, but you have to do good work all over the place. Now, we do major work first and minor work second. So we're not talking about every little subdivision in through here, even though we're drawing this with the bumps on it. We're worrying about making sure we get any major subdivision, like say it's the length of this to the length of this or something like that. We're talking about the large subdivisions. We're really working on those. And we're using very specific points to make them. We're articulating these points. Like I said over here, this looks like, it looks like a piece of nature. It looks like nature could have done that. And so it's plausibly in the ballpark if it's adequate to express that. But the point is we're going to be very articulate as we can right here and get that to play to this one to get this angle right and to get the general fullness of that or S-curve or whatever of that larger shape to perform. But everything writ large, keep that in mind. Everything, all the big things is what we're aiming at first, but we're using the specifics. So, example, when we draw this and we're massing it, we mass it to the edge that's actually there, so it's a looking like moment. Much as we said before, you cut this one out. If it's a sharp edge, you cut it as a sharp edge. If it's a low contrast, and this is a higher contrast, or wherever you are down here, and you're doing these to each other, you make sure you tune every aspect of it. So it's just a little quick pick up, while you're down there, just make sure it's right before you move on. Now, I say right, meaning as likely as you can get it, because these first two things are just like pigs in a poke. You're going to get more data, and as you get more data, you're going to want to come back and correct these things, which is all the more reason to talk about it as an iterative process. You want to get around to be able to come back to the point. So one of the things I tell students, well, let me get to that. This is a portrait I did of my son, but this would be an example of how we weren't at the beginning into all the littlenesses of whatever bumps were happening here. We're into this top, forming a top, and just that much of it probably, and into this as the low point. Just to let you know, and then you make sure those are sitting at the right angle to each other and the right contrast comparatively and all that sort of stuff. And then you're looking for the next things that might be useful. That's a good one that might be useful. Or some subdivision, halves, quarters, these sorts of things might be rather useful. Some great break like that might be useful. Or this one. So you see what I'm talking about. We're talking about being articulate in those places. But okay, but I'm going to jump away from that. This is the list, okay? And I'm going to show you. You've seen what I'm talking about already a little bit. I'm going to point at some ang and a Degas drawing or two. But the first thing I want you to be aware of that what we're doing is we're drawing long lines. And that means we're drawing meaningful lines. We're drawing real lines with bumps, bump count, right? So when you're talking Sargent, you'd hear him, he would talk about, what you'll see in his work is you see a line that comes down, turns a corner, and makes another blip, and then maybe goes out. So he's enough, as much as he could hold in his mind at one time. And he talks that way about memorizing the line. So we're drawing this long line. You're going to find that if you memorize a long line, you're going to draw a more graceful line. It's going to have more hang togetherness, right? More stick-to-itiveness, whatever. So we draw long lines, but we are making points. We'll get to that. And we're drawing lines with the idea of establishing the major linear abstractions. So if you're looking at, we're talking about getting this great sweep to come through here correctly. Even though we're drawing with bumps on it, we memorize it with the bumps on it, but the real focus of our work is to get this thing to sweep through like it does, right? Or to get the totality of this thing here to make that sort of bowing arc, like a bow firing an arrow, etc. So that you see that we're after major forms, major shapes, major. Actually, I should have said shapes instead of forms. I don't mean the rounding of form yet, but in this outline phase, we're talking about the great sweep of this thing here and getting it really right and getting it to play off the big shape over here, not counting all the little blips with the idea of counting blips. The blips are just there because they're there, but what we're really doing is we're making sure we get that blip in the right place because that's a major change in angle. And we have this dip here that we probably want, but what we're really after is this great sweep, the great angle of this coming down into the foot or coming down into this passage over here. You can see how valuable that sort of thinking is. So, but we're after these long things, and yet you want to articulate the things that make them up. But you never lose your focus. You're after the big events, okay? So now we work lighter at first. Now, if you look at anybody else, you'll see there's a drawing under a drawing under a drawing. You know what I mean? You'll find light drawing, light marks, tentative marks they're called. And that's just pencil drawing, by the way. But in charcoal, we do the same thing. We draw lighter than we intend to mass. And I tell students to draw just as dark as they can see and no darker. And use a very fine point, by the way, so that it's a very thin line. It's not going to take up a lot of ground, but light it first. And if you're listening to Speed or some of those guys, they'll talk about saying pencil drawing is like 3 drawings. It's basically you do a light one and you do a darker one. As you get more confidence, you really start pushing the values and start speaking with authority. Well, that's sort of the model underlying everything we do. But by the time you've drawn a long line 3 times, you're starting to draw it with confidence. So, but lighter at first. Then it's all the points and angles discussion. That's the Sargent thing. So if you're talking points and angles, you're talking these 2 points here, and that angle. You see that angle is going to be very important. And writing that angle is this great thing here. And by the way, there are a lot of little angles, that are made up by this sort of a point there, but that's small stuff. We're talking about the angle, say between this and that up there, say between this and this, and whatever other ones we wind up seeing, and especially the longer the better, So at some point you're talking about something. So sometimes things are actually plums. That's an angle. But we're talking about points and angles. If you're Sargent, you're talking about having found something that's usefully expressed as a very clear phenomenon. And the only way you can make that useful as a point is to really draw it articulately. And then you can see where it lands from here to there, for example. But so no matter what point you have, you have to check it out to the angles. You have to check it out in angle. But it also has this great form thing it's doing, but the angle underlies everything, okay? Never let the plum out of your left hand, is what the Sargent said, right? Yeah, right. So the authoritative line, the comment made by Degas is anybody who drew a line with that much authority must have known where he was starting and where he was going to end. I should look at a Sargent here. A Degas here. But at some points you can see a line, it could be a line like this right here. If you've drawn that at one single stroke, it's because you knew for sure, based on points, for example, and the underlying lighter marks, but you know where the shape starts, where it picks up. And he had a lostness to work with maybe here. You know where it picks up, and you know where it's going to end. You've already pre-positioned those. That's points angle thinking. Okay. So to draw a line with authority that's like your goal, isn't it? To draw this line from here to here, where you got this angle right. You're looking at plumb, that's something very near vertical. Some parts of it are probably just pure vertical. So you just really have to get that great form with its bumps in their right places. And if you've drawn it 3 times, you're going to draw it really beautifully by the third time on the angle. And the angle, sometimes you'll draw that angle and you'll see it wrong, and you won't notice it until you see it, until you look at it. Again, it's a points angles thing, no matter what. Every time you're drawing a line per se, we need to talk about these points, and these points need to be articulate. They need to actually say their name enough for it to be a useful discussion, even. So, by the way, this guy's this is an example of having. You can see underlying drawing in several places on these and the Yang drawings that I have. You'll see that he has been all over the place. He didn't start and noodle from left to right and make this right at the beginning. He went around and speculated. He discussed things with himself. I wonder if there's one spot on here. Maybe you could look at a part, maybe a little bit of the hair back there or something where there's almost no marks. But very faint marking at the beginning while you search your way around. Go look at the early drawings or unfinished drawings by good draftsmen. You'll see more clearly what I'm talking about. So, but we're trying to make it as like as we can the first time. That's Bonnat rule, right? So even though we're going to go around and around, we're going to go over the whole ground. Even if it's just line drawing, we're going to go over the whole ground over and over again. And again, remember, that's because we need to establish the relationships, and all the parts need to be out there conversing with each other so we can see them. If you're drawing with your eyes, that's the key thing. So you're going to articulate the line as like as you can. And that's whenever you're going to draw the line, make it as like as you can. And the next thing that's going to happen is when you draw it again, you're going to make it even more like. You're not going to just attach things to it to make it more like, but you're going to see it all over again in its unity, and you're going to make it even more like. So gradually, you're seeing this better and better. Now, what happens is when you start adding littlenesses, like more bumps, you can have a problem. If you add these bumps just to add bumps, you can hope, and I think that's what you're implying, Leo, you can hope that it won't destroy this great sweeping form. Or you can say, I got to put these bumps on, and I got to look at this thing and see how these bumps enhance that form, see how they play on it. And you get more involved. That's one of those reasons I like to be into the bumps early, because I want to know how it's making that arc right there. I want to know how it's doing that, right? And the best way to see it is to get them all on there and do them together. But your main focus is on getting the arc at the right angle, the big arc at the right angle. And then as you go working on the next ones, notice which little one of these things you might work on first, even to improve the great arc, or whatever it is that's at least like in a big way. Hope that's coming across to you all. Making it like doesn't necessarily mean adding more details, right? It just, when you're talking about some of these great lines, they're made out of so many bumps and all that sort of stuff, but you can put a lot of time into expressing form and all sorts of stuff through the contour. And I'm talking about the form of what's in front of you. And, there's something about putting the time in and really disciplining yourself to make a likeness and dig deep, find out what that's really about. You know what I'm saying? But make it as like as you can the first time and keep on pushing that. Not with the idea that right is what makes a good painting. It's a training of the eye. It's a huge thing. It's about just simply training the eye. How can you keep the great sweeping shape and count the bumps all at the same time? Is a thing, right? So I talked about the spiral idea, did I not? So I talk about being all over the place at once in a drawing, but you're also doing, ultimately, by the time you get to a mass drawing, you're doing everything. So you're doing form, value movements, you're doing light effects, and so on. So there's more to it. So there's this, if you think of spirals, there's the first spiral is this big. We're talking about a pyramid, right? And the next spiral will be a little smaller as you work on lesser things. And they're smaller, and then you work on little things. But you'll have to work on the little things all over the place also. You're not going to go and finish one area up and noodle it all up to the nth degree. You'll lose unity, and you won't be in Baron Grove's model, which just says painting should be in unity at all times. Drawing should be in unity at all times. So you're doing all the big things and being in unity that way and making it right and true as much as you can with the greater things. And then you're going into through the whole cycle again with lesser levels, or what I mean is more minor levels, subdivisions. And meaning, like, if you're doing the head is an egg, but the head is full of bumps, those bumps are going to be a secondary discussion, right? And there might be some major bumps, and then there might be a whole lot of little nostril bumps or some other kinds of little formy things. You can see that we're not going to be into all those things early, so we're going to have to be all over the place. But when we start bringing up a certain kind of noodling in this place, a certain kind of data detail, we'll want to get it in all the other parts of the painting. So that, hence the idea of being all over the place at once, and the idea of iteration. You have to go through the whole thing again, and that's just the way it works. Although your point there was, how do you tie it on? I mean, how do you avoid losing the beauty of the great line? You don't simply rely on a great line to be beautiful, and there it is, happy days are here. You're actually constantly improving the beauty of that great line all the way through the big things, the middle things, and the little things. You're always looking to improve that beautiful and get really bringing even more so the beauty of that contour, say. So, but that's in the class. So the repetitions, the iterations, etc. And by the way, don't forget that drawing is redrawing. I'm purposely putting this list up for you to look at with me. But drawing by its definition is you put up a top and bottom, and then you have to make corrections immediately. You have to do some redrawing. And so you do it as like as you can because of that, by the way. And I'm saying, I'm definitely an aim small, miss small guy. Make it as like as you can the first time is in that mentality. And that was expressed by an academic, and yet I think it applies just as much, well, I know it applies just as much to the way the Boston School painter thinks. But you have to be anticipate. You put something up there. It's just a suggestion. What did Marcus Aurelius says? There's just opinions and perspectives, right? So you're putting up a piece of the head, and you put a piece of the foot up there, and that's your first view of it. That's your first opinion of it. It's your first statement, right? And now you're going to simply correct it by seeing them there. You're going to be easily able to correct the angle, for example, and so on. And that's what I'm suggesting from the beginning that we're going to be doing, okay? But you redraw right from the start. And what I'm trying to get people to do is to make corrections, to make better corrections without getting lost in them. Make corrections that are better, but don't go any past the point where they're just useful to the bigger discussion you're having. You're not into it for a literal kind of transposition, like if you were doing sight size or something. It's nothing like that. So, and keep remembering the first mark is a question mark. It's always that. The first thing you put up there in any area at any time. I mean, for crying out loud, some days you just put a mark up there and you think, why did I put it over there? Other days you put a mark up there and it's exactly where you would have meant to put it, and were you just in your right? I don't know. But the first mark is always thought of as a question mark. Now you can understand that in paint. You first put your a light note up there and you realize it isn't dark enough because it won't contain the color, and you have to adjust it right there on the spot before you put anything else out there. And then you have, again, the question of the searching idea, the idea of searching lines. That's all we're doing. We're putting out marks that'll help you in the search for the lines. The search is you're trying to find them onto the canvas, right? So you begin to put a few things out there, and that will set up this, and will set up that. But the whole thing is, in the Boston School way of conversing, it's a search. And then what I said before already is this idea of reinforcement by elaboration. So the more data you put in, the more the big things should really say their name even more so, right? And then you're always incorporating the new. And that was the idea that if you add a new piece, if you're gonna put fingers on my hand, say I've drawn a thing that looks like a cup, but it's time to subdivide it. It wasn't time before because I was talking about just the big color and value and the baldness of this compared to whatever other data was in the world. But when you have to put a new thing in, your job is to fully incorporate it into that thing right at the time, and make it, and do it gracefully, do it fluidly, make it all hang together. Tying on is a word I use sometimes. Okay, And there are graceful ways to do it and less graceful ways to do it. So, so what you're seeing here is, well, you're seeing here a whole series of underlying lighter lines. And that's my point. Don't you see that? There's this whole thing. He's already been all over the place. He's over the place again. And by the time he starts doing stuff where it looks like he's totally confident, it's because he is. He's already done enough research at a lighter value. And that's the nature of the line thing. But you can see he's the kind of guy who makes it as like as he can the first time. Maybe he's the guy this comes from. You can also see that he's, in the earliest lines, he's trying to make them have content in them. They look like he saw them, and he looks like he saw the actual, like he had a snapshot of the contour created by. And by the way, that seeing two-dimensionally is a big deal. Make sure you do that constantly with all this stuff. So I've talked about the Degas. I think I've talked enough about that. Let's go to the. Was there anything else? No. Let's just go to this one. I think we can maybe close it out talking about this one. In this one, I'm showing you this whole thing about iterations. So in just the color, I've been all over the place, right? Now, the first thing I did is I spotted color around, just spotted around it like this, just in the middle of white. I spotted these colors around. Then the second iteration, I went through and improved them all. And I began to improve the colors by making joints here. And now we're going all the way around with the idea of setting up the drawing, so to speak, which is about setting up the top and bottom, making choices here. And using enough data to look like itself. It has to look enough like itself to rather be that thing. Now, I don't mean a foot. I mean to be a visual impression. And for this to be enough to be that thing here, you can see it becomes much more of that thing here in this next iteration. But I'm all over the place at once. I'm getting the width of this thing. I'm beginning to aim at the gesture of this thing. And I'm improving the color relations. I know what my most chromatic note is. I know the bluer versus the greener, et cetera, of all those things. And I do apologize to you that these colors aren't more like that because they were much closer to this. This version is like what I'd call a good start. It's like in that state. It's well set up in color and form and other ways. Placements on the page and all that stuff. But so I apologize because when I put darks down, they aren't that far off. I go straight for them. Now, in some cases, the darks will be the last thing to get all the way there because you're working on a white canvas. But you can follow that. What I'm doing is setting up top and bottom. That's big stuff. But I'm doing it with the look of nature at spots, right? And then I'm going down to other spots where I need a major break here. I have to draw enough drawing. And you can see what I was after probably mostly was this thing right here. And a little of this to go with it, so that to make that location. And excuse me, it's one of those days. But you can see that I'm doing it, like even this thing here, even though it's not well developed, it actually has that essential feeling of what it's doing by value and by shape and creating a light effect and all that sort of stuff. But it's not about the littleness of this spot. So don't overthink that part. I'm not drawing these things in finessed little ways. I'm drawing them in some level of precision, but it's essential precision or adequate precision. So it's enough like. A thing like this, that's enough like. You can see it feels rather like a person's head. And by the time you get to the end here, it's not that different from what we had when we started, or these parts here. If the colors were not, the values weren't so silly looking compared to this one. But you can see I've been all over the place at once, and now I'm going all over the place at once, and now we're getting into subdivisions. Like this is like a quarters mark. This thing here winds up being fairly significant. This, by the way, is the base. It's these two things here clearly forming that low place. This is the upper place. So then, and this was already, these two are already forming a half place. But these are now subdividing even further into quarters, just because I'm not saying there's a reason why I do that, except that that's a simpler, it's now gradually moving us in. So we're not going into little, you're not jumping from big to little, we're jumping from big to middle size to little. And yet we're using the specific. So if you think this thing over here, that by this point is quite articulate here, does a very definite thing here, and has that bit of the deltoid there. Well, that was implied over here, but mostly it looks like all I was trying to do is get this point. Now over here, I've altered all that stuff and lost most of this. So, but we're back to that same issue again, though, is what's setting up my points. And you can see that I'm trying to get very specific about some aspects of this, probably this bottom here, maybe to this, to set up a very simple, definite subdivision. Now, that's a visual subdivision, by the way. But to even talk about the subdivision, you have to be all over the place. You have to be in here now, and then down here. Well, so you're all over the place. And all over the place in the start, and all the horses at once is us. We are Mr. Iteration. We're all over the place at once doing majors, then we're all over the place at once doing middles. And I say that by both effect and location. Size, effect, so the stronger effects to the middling strong effects to the weaker effects, and the great sizes to the middle sizes to the little things. But we're all over the place. You have to be. There's no other way to do it this way, the way we're talking about it. I'm hoping this is coming across to you. I'm not mishearing your questions. I sometimes do that. But you can see that that's how the subdivision process works, going from greater to lesser and yet, no matter where we go, we're trying to articulate it with the look of nature at these places, so it's adequately enough. Gamma would refer to that as a sketch version of it, right? You can see this is a lot more articulate by the time I get to this phase. And by the way, this is hours and hours later. I don't know how many hours later, but this was probably all in the first day. I don't know how many, first couple hours. These are probably 2+ hour sittings. So, and I think this is just part of a sitting, because I always cover the canvas in the first sitting. So, what else can I say? So you can see that I've been all over the place here. I've changed the colors a little bit. I've been more specific about some of the phenomena in this area. But it's the strong phenomena that helps to set up, say, the halfway place that made me have to do that, for example. Or it was the color phenomena. I needed to know something about the kinds of notes that are sitting over here to see if my color field, the thing taken as a whole. By the way, the mission is to do the thing as a whole, is what makes you have to go through the whole and then keep going through the whole in more and more, in all these iterations, as you say. Fun word. I really like that word. It's a good one. I don't know who uses that on a routine basis, but I might start doing it. Although, there are other words. I mean, re-iterating is one of them. You've been around there, and I was talking about it again. Let's talk about it this time with more information. But we are always all over the place at once. You see this thing here got bigger, so I was down here. You can see that this came into being, so I was there. You can see a bunch of this came into being, and this was filled out. So I've been all over in this area more. You see I've improved this. I've done more work up here. I've gotten all the way up to here and down here. So I've really improved my top and bottom, so it's more evident that whether I'm in the ballpark or not. And again, these areas are just put down in ways that are essential. These aren't, even though I talk about the specificity, when you're into something that you're going to use for a point, then you need it to be articulate enough, which means you make it rather of a likeness there, so it feels like itself. So then you can use it to get the angle right between this and that. And whatever points you have, that's when you find usefulness. You get to a point like this, you can get angles right between this and this, or between this and this. So, all right. I wonder if I need to say more. The whole thing just keeps coming up. Out of the fog is part of what this is. You can see how this is way in the fog here, and it's starting to come out of the fog here. And then by the time you get this stuff, this is considerably out of the fog. You can see the model coming out of the fog. But again, that's what forces it to be all over the place at once. If the car is coming out of the fog, you're going to see just the headlights. But there'll be two things. That'll be all you're talking about. But as it comes out more, you'll see more of the grill, And it comes out more, you're going to start seeing more of the hood and some of the windshield wipers or something. You see what I'm saying? Well, that requires us to keep being all over the place at once and keep relating things to the headlights. You know what I mean? Sounds like an accident on its way to happen, by the way. Yeah. I wonder what else I can say. The generic blobbiness of this thing here was very adequate for a while. And then it got a little bit better here, but by the time I'm here, you can see that there are more forms, but they're not still bean counted forms. They're not left to right little forms. The thing is, we don't really want all the little forms. We want this to be big. We want this to be right in big ways, and we want to get out of there. The noodling stuff, that's all photography. That's I think that's driven by the fact of photography. The history of painting, most paintings end in a place without, in a sense, more detail than this. They have more finesse than this, but that's about the level of stuff you expect to then bring on, right? To refine. Yeah, it'll contain more individual forms and things like that. But the beauty of this figure is already there in the great forms, if there's going to be any, in the great color movements, in the great gesture, and the great patterns on the page, and all those sorts of ways. But you can talk about even the patterning on the page. You're working on improving the abstractions. The whole world and how all the stuff that the play of silhouettes all the way through this thing, the distribution of greens. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is, but to really do it, you're going to have to be over here to be over there. How many times have you hit a note and only to realize it was the wrong note because it was the other note that was wrong? You changed your note and you should have changed the other note. Well, it's like that. So there's always this interplay of that kind of information. Doing a thing like this twice, I keep thinking I've said everything, or I may be rushing it even. I don't know. Um, but let's go back to your question. I think that's the best thing to do. And then if there's anything else I should add to that, I will. Um, so in the visual draw as you see it, that is, say, draw with your eyes approach, do you still work iteratively? I hope that's come across to you, that I'm always all over the place at once, all the time. No matter what I'm drawing, I'm seeing what it does with something else. It's the relational world. You're tuning them into each other. And as you get more information, you have to go back to those points and retune them, you might say, right? And that's what's going to keep happening here. Now, there are some things that are fixed, and there's no question about that. For example, when you say what the light is light and dark is dark are, they wind up being pretty well fixed by your experience. What's the most chromatic note? Well, that note has to be the most chromatic note. Whatever you set there is going to be the table. You're going to be keying to that note. So some things are fixed in one sense. But then, even if that note, which mostly you can't hit, you're going to call it red X. You're going to say, well, now I've got to make everything to make that red X look like the red it really is instead of the red we're stuck with. And that's a good conversation you get with Degas. But that's a product of, you get back to it, you put out a note, and then you get all these other guys going, and before you know it, all sorts of conversations are happening that force you into correcting here and correcting there. Round and round it goes. All right. So once you put down a contour line, can you still go back and correct it? Yeah, I hope that's clear to you now. Without losing the grace, no. In fact, you go back and improve the grace. Every time you draw it more beautifully than the last time. Again, you want to work from lighter to darker if you're talking pencil drawing. In paint, you don't have to worry about that. But you want to chase down these major lines on the first day when you can really, if you have to, rag some darks out of an area where you want to paint lights. You know what I mean? Those are kinds of things that are very valuable. Another one of the reasons to try to get to your major shapes and power light effects and really place them brilliantly in your start, and so that you don't have to go back because that's the one thing. It's not so much that you'll lose the grace of it. You want to be able to draw it over and over and search it out as you get more. Like if you don't have the beautiful curve of the calf on there, you're not really in the game about what the hip is doing. It's the hip into the calf. It's quoting Michelangelo, right? That is that counterpoint that makes them both beautiful, or makes the whole thing a more beautiful unity. So you can see how much one line isn't going to be that anyway. But you will aim for it to be as beautiful as you can, make it as like as you can, see its beauty and articulate it as best you can, knowing that it's probably going to have to be improved. Might wind up in the wrong place. You have to draw it again. When you draw it again, draw it even better than the last time. But that when you come back to draw it again, it's because of new information. And so now you're the iteration, okay? That's the returning in cycles through the whole thing. So that's one thing. The proponents of okay, let's see now. So how does one avoid and correct one's mistakes when working with the visual approach? Yeah, I think I've shown you that. The idea that you're going to correct as you go, and but it's not mistakes. As I said before, don't think of mistakes. Think of them as first efforts, and they can't expect to be right on the money. They're going to be. As my wife, the writer, says, writing is rewriting. Keep that in mind. You put something out there, you get it going, and all of a sudden you realize the bigger package that you've got there, and you realize it can't be like that. There's a little adjusting that's going to go on. So don't think of them as corrections. Now, I know you're making a likeness, you're making it look like that. Like whatever's sitting over there, you're just trying to make it look like that. But But the correctness of one spot isn't, I mean, in one sense, there's no such thing. It's the correctness of the set. The only absolutes, I've said to people before, the only thing absolute about painting is the relationships. So what you're really trying to do is get the beauty of this to that. And you keep on tuning it, because the beauty of this to this is one thing, but this has got to be beautiful to that too. And it's got to be right to this, and it's got to be right to that. Do you see what I'm saying? That requires you, every time you bring in new data, to go back and review it to all the other data that's already in the picture. That's iterative by miles. That defines practically the word iterative. All right. I don't know if I've said it too much, if said it well enough. I don't know. Come back at me if this isn't coming across to you clearly. Um, yeah, but the idea of both the large and the small relationships, that's a bit of a misunderstanding. Every mark you make, you can only make a small mark. Just talk about color. And so can that mark be right? In some sense, yeah. Um, as a small mark, you're trying to find the particular color that's, say, here compared to the different color that's over somewhere else. Well, yeah, so in one sense, those are little, but they're what you're really correcting always is the relationship, which is always big. Relationships are big. Marks are little. We as I said, we think like God, but we make marks like ants. We put down chunks. We make little marks. But you got to have this bigger eye, this bigger mind, the mind that takes in the whole. When you start taking in the whole, this all makes more sense, that you have to be iterative. You have to be all over the place at once, and then you have to review everything simultaneously. You're always in and out of it, but always making it as like as you can the first time. Not in little ways, but in useful ways. Not for its own sake, but for the greater unity and the greater interplay. All right. All right. Well, thank you again, guys. My faithful friends, Ben C., Jimmy C., Adam C., Stephen J., Linda J., for continuing to help out. And for all of you, the subscriptions are going up. We're way up there now, almost 18,000. That's really cool to see. And we do mean to do a live one of these days soon again for you guys. And what else was I going to say? Oh yeah, don't forget to like and share and all the rest. It's very much appreciated, and I really appreciate your comments coming back to us. So many of you have been very kind. I don't, if somebody doesn't get it or doesn't like what I'm saying, it's okay. I don't know why you come back and yell at me, but if you have something in which you have a dispute, I'm actually loving. I believe the truth is in the conflict of ideas, and even the truth. I'm just trying to get across the truth of this way of working. So if you think something is going on that doesn't make any sense in the world of painting, it will help me to clarify our little world here. If you tell me, I mean, just be civil, whatever. But I'm definitely not opposed to conflicting ideas or quizzing and whatever it is. All right. And again, don't forget, we are trying to aim at a workshop, an intensive workshop in London as of in this coming spring. So that will be end of May, to the middle of June, somewhere in there, 4 weeks. Intensive workshop for pastel and oil painters. Really about this thinking that you're seeing here, visual order thinking, visual order impressionism, if you want to call it that. Well, of course, what impressionism in a sense isn't visual order, but the methodology that has this content, it's my term for it, visual order. Visual order is bigger than that, but nevertheless, as methods go. Anyway, thank you, Leo, very much for that question. And I hope you all have a very nice week painting.